Hello and welcome to Cloudy with a Chance of Insights, the fortnightly podcast all around the Microsoft Cloud. This week we've got a bumper episode. I think that's fair to say. David has got a very wide-ranging list of topics that he wants to cover, running through from Microsoft Azure Framework, which is replacing AutoGen and Semantic Kernel, Arc Gateway, which is a nice one for the local Azure local pieces, which we've talked about frequently. Microsoft's new AI framework, which is training reasoning models at a fraction of the cost, 3D rendering using only ML or machine learning, an MCP interviewer has been created. I wonder if that's similar to the actress that was on the BBC the other day, actually. But anyway, digression even in the intro. VMware pricing, thanks to Broadcom, is going to change probably in Azure. Prioritization, inclusion over convention, so rethinking how Microsoft designs packaging. Spec-Driven development with AI, and one token to rule them all, which I'll be intrigued to see where that one is going with the Lord of the Rings reference in there. Again, for anybody that's listening and wants to jump to one of those topics, they should be in the chapter bits within YouTube, so you can just jump straight to them if you want to. And Cyrus is going to cover off the new Sentinel Graph, which anybody who's following me on LinkedIn will know that I've been posting about because IBM are working on a Sentinel Graph offering. So keep your eyes open for that one. There's an updated version of Meister on Azure Web Apps and ability to run KQL queries in Defender XDR, plus Microsoft Sentinel UEBA. So I'm not sure actually how to pronounce that, so I'll just give you the letters in the acronym and we'll go from there. I'm going to cover off certifications this week, primarily because Microsoft have been badgering me for the last 2 to 4 weeks around agreeing what IBM's certification numbers will be for their fiscal year. So that's top of mind. So I thought I'd just recap and go through some of the things that I've learned and had to go through over that period of time. So seeing as David has pretty much 9 topics to go through, if I'm counting that correctly, I will pass across to him. He can kick us off, and then we will go from there.
Sounds good, and thank you. Yes, and so many topics because I missed the last one. I had a bunch stacked up then, and I've got some other stuff that I saw, so I couldn't let them go. So thank you for humouring me and letting me go through them all. So as Richard said, first one I'm going to talk about is Microsoft Agent Framework. And Microsoft has launched this as an open source engine for building and running AI agents. Super. Until now, developers had 2 main options, really. It was AutoGen or Semantic Kernel. And AutoGen was typically used for sort of the early proof of concept stuff. And then you had Semantic Kernel for the production stuff. Now, super useful individually, but a bit fragmented because there was never a super easy path to go from AutoGen over to Semantic Kernel. So the new framework merges the best of both. It offers open standards like MCP and Open API for interoperability. It includes built-in orchestration styles such as handoff or group chat, and it adds of enterprise readiness with observability. Compliance hooks, and of course, hosted in Azure. Of course, why not? It also provides extensibility, so from things like connectors to pluggable memory backends. And really, if you've been working with Semantic Kernel or AutoGen, this is a natural upgrade path. It brings them both together. It makes it easier to govern, easier to scale, easier to build these agentic AI capabilities. So super interesting. The link should be down there somewhere, I presume. So go read about it. Well worth investing your time in that. Second one was Arc Gateway. So I think we may have touched on this in a past one, but it's gone to general availability, which is super. Yay, means it's supported and everything. And the Arc Gateway for Azure Local, as we know, will connect on-premises and edge environments to Azure. And one of the challenges when you do those things is that you need dozens, if not hundreds of firewall rules, right? Complex configurations, ongoing security work overhead. And Azure Arc Gateway simplifies this by funneling all HTTPS traffic from the Azure local instance through to a centralized egress endpoint, and then that in turn reduces the number of endpoints you need, which is awesome. They say something like more than 100 down to less than something like 28, I think it is. So it's quite a big change. And for all the security folk amongst us, this unified approach not only simplifies that firewall and network and management, but helps you maintain a strong security posture, which obviously is super, super important. Right now, even though it's GA, a couple of things to be mindful of. It supports infrastructure endpoints, so things like Azure local VMs. And in preview, they've got AKA clusters. So, bits of that capability is still in preview. And then if you want to enable Arc Gateway on existing Azure local servers, so existing ones, that isn't quite there yet. So there are some gotchas. So you need to, again, go read and make up your own mind as to whether it's something that you want to onboard. Sounds super interesting. Next one, this new AI framework for training models at a fraction of the cost. We all love saving money, don't we? And I think the next three come from my favorite source, which is Microsoft Research. So plenty to read there. And they've developed a new reinforcement learning framework that trains large language models for complex reasoning tasks at a fraction of the usual computational cost. So that is all goodness. It's called R*2 agent, uses a combination of sort of algorithmic innovations, software optimizations to make the training process more efficient, requiring less data and making better use of the hardware. Super. The example they give, I think, is they did a 14 billion parameter model fine-tuned with R*2 agent, and it shows near state-of-the-art performance, surpassing the much larger sort of 671 billion parameter DeepSeek R1 on key math benchmarks, and that's super interesting, while giving more concise answers. So that obviously, still in research, but gives a horizon view of how you can develop more reliable, low-cost, and effective agents, so you can get that value out of smaller open source models. And obviously smaller is the direction of travel, right? A lot of people are wanting those smaller agents to be able to do specific things. IBM certainly is pushing that quite hard at the moment. Another one from research, and you may have seen this in some places on the internet already. And this is doing 3D rendering using only ML, which is just madness. I don't understand how we can do these things. But anyway, so they've created this thing called Render Former, which is a new neural network architecture that reimagines how 3D rendering is essentially entirely done through learned models. So I don't know if you know, but sort of traditional rendering relies on sort of physics-based techniques like ray tracing or rasterization. Those are the things that NVIDIA do super, super well, right? Using explicit algorithms to simulate light and materials. Now, the natural rendering has begun to supplement these methods using just image inputs. Now, it's not a panacea, right? They struggle with arbitrary scenes or complex things, right? But being able to provide a image and then it generating the 3D world onwards from that image, amazing stuff. And wherever you go in the world, it'll just keep rendering it. So super clever. Does it through 3D geometry, so essentially triangle meshes. Sort of harks me back to the 80s, because everything was triangles then, wasn't it, Richard? If you remember the old games, everything was triangles. So we're kind of going full circle, but I digress. And they're calling them triangle tokens. So, which is super cool. And they also tokenize lighting. And they can do like transformer branches working together. So viewing independent effects like shadows and diffuse and illumination. So, they work together to bring together these things. Obviously, it's been trained on a large set of 3D data sets, Observers. I've never come across that before. I'm gonna have a poke at it because it's not something that I've come across before. But super interesting. And like I said, it's going to struggle with the complex things. But again, at research point, we'll be able to. I'm sure it will evolve as time goes on. And if you think about what NVIDIA does with DLSS. Essentially what they're doing is predicting the next frame. So instead of having a rasterized frame and then predicting the next frame, you just predict using the ML model, which is, it's going to be super interesting. Number 5, our MCP interviewer, which sort of threw me, but Microsoft Research have introduced this idea of tool space interference as a key challenge in model context protocols. So let me sort of explain that. MCP is designed to let agents and tools from sort of different providers work together, right? But as that ecosystem grows, multiple tools will then potentially overlap in function. So, for example, a system could interact with GitHub through a browser, CLI, or a MCP server. And these overlapping pathways can confuse orchestration, right? Leading to longer task chains, wasted tokens. Nobody wants to waste tokens. They're expensive. We don't want to do that, and generates lots of energy. And ultimately, you kind of have this brittle error handling scenario. So again, to understand the problem, Microsoft Research surveyed, they surveyed 1,500 MCP servers. Do you survey something that's inanimate? I don't know. But anyway, that's what they did. And they found a bunch of recurring issues. So many servers exposed dozens of tools, which obviously then increases failure risk. Tool outputs can be so large they overflow the context windows. That's not good. Error handling is inconsistent. Well, yeah, it's unfortunately all too common. And you get things like naming collisions because common commands like search appear in multiple servers, but they behave differently, so you get different outputs. And then added to that, the MCP spec today doesn't enforce namespaces or consistent approaches to resource sharing. So the research then goes on to offer some really useful guidance. Protocol designers should introduce namespaces and better grouping. Server developers should provide metadata and single model compatibility. And client developers need to sort of filter or summarize how the heavy outputs, and then registry should curate these tools for interoperability. So well worth a read. Please do, again, go read that because it was a fascinating read. Right, next one. Ooh, VMware, AVS in Azure. So Microsoft, as many people know, have been bundling AVS licenses with the service. As of the 16th, I think, of this month, which is why I wanted to shoehorn it in this week, that stops. So whenever you buy a new AVS capability, you have to bring your own license, which means you have to then go to Broadcom or authorized reseller, whoever it is, to be able to buy the licenses. And that's quite a big change. Now, it doesn't affect, obviously, people that have already got licenses, but that will affect them on the renewal. Pay-as-you-go, I think, will be with bundle VCF is only going to be supported up until October 31st. Can't imagine that many people are on pay-as-you-go because most people tend to go for the reserved instances and the reduced cost, right? But if there are, then obviously it's something you need to plan for in a year's time, which is actually not that long. So, yeah, go check your services and see when they're due to run out. Next to last? I think it's next to last, isn't it? So, completely different topic, but it's sort of captured me, which is how Microsoft have prioritized inclusion from a packaging perspective. So we know, I guess, how can I say it? So imagine being able to open a box without wrestling with these horrible little seals, or requiring fine motor control with your nails to be able to get the flipping thing open, right? And they've done this with a inclusion first mindset, and they've created a guide. So again, I'm not going to dive into what the guide says, but essentially the guide rethinks sort of conventional design of packaging, and rather prioritizes usability for all, right? Adding tactile symbols, higher contrast, easier openers, larger fonts, intuitive layouts, right? Sometimes you look at this thing, how on earth am I meant to get that open? So, the journey began with the Xbox Adaptive Controller, and that packaging essentially became the catalyst for the team to question, okay, well, what does premium actually mean? And they now see that true premium design isn't just about aesthetics, right? But things like empathy, dignity, and everyday usability for everyone. So again, it's not a finished rule book or anything, but equally it's an invitation, I think, for people to go and look and read and understand how maybe you can do that in your environment. So super interesting. Oh no, yes, you're right, I had 3 left. Spec-driven development. So this is super interesting. So what if your intent, not your code, became the source of truth when working with AI coding agents? And GitHub's new Spec Kit sort of sets out to do that. So instead of relying on loose prompts and hoping the model gets it right, which we all know it can be quite variable and you have to become a prompt expert. Rather, SpecKit provides a spec-driven development approach, which is super. So you start with a living specification, you turn it into a technical plan, you break it into tasks, and then you let the agent do each bits of those tasks. So you can kind of see how you're going to get better outcomes by that, more consistent outcomes by doing that. Already works with GitHub, obviously, Copilot, also works with Claude Code and Gemini CLI. And I guess the principle is fairly straightforward. The specification becomes the contract. That reduces ambiguity and cuts down on surprises. And again, it's not about replacing developers in any way, shape, or form, but it's helping give the agents a clear framework to operate. It's community driven. So again, go look, go read, make of it what you like. Last one. This one's quite a biggie. So fairly recently, a chap called Dirk Jan Mollema. I probably butchered his name. I'm really sorry if you happen upon this at some point in the future. But he highlighted a really serious Entra ID issue that it's now been patched, right? So it was under the bug bounty thing. So it's all done. But essentially, undocumented actor and personalization tokens could be abused to act as any user, including global admins. So one ring to rule, one token to rule them all. Well, if you've got a global admin token, then that's going to be a challenge, right, Richard, to what you said earlier. And the problem came from a combination of unsigned tokens with a validation flaw in the old Azure AD Graph API, making cross-tenant compromise possible. And the scary thing was, it wouldn't leave any traces in the victim tenant, so you couldn't even see it happening. His research showed, how tenant IDs and user identities could be used to impersonate privileged accounts and carry out directory level operations, which is super scary. Microsoft obviously moved quickly once they were notified, applied fixes, created a CVE, provided mitigation guidance. So, for anyone responsible in Entra ID or Microsoft 365 security, that article is super worth reading. It goes into, obviously, the mechanics of how he did it. And I think a lesson for us all, right? The risks of legacy APIs and still hanging around. So something for us all to take away there. So super interesting, super scary, and I'm done.
I'm speechless. We've managed to get through those topics in record time. I would say, primarily because I didn't interrupt, which probably would have extended those even further. Sorry, I've just caused David to choke on his coffee or his tea. For those who's not watching this on YouTube or Spotify video, because we do publish this on Spotify as a video as well. Yeah, there's a couple of things that sort of not necessarily jumped out, but a couple of things that have been like, that's caused me problems this week. So David knows, because I pinged him about this earlier on this week. So I actually had to crack open Visual Studio and start writing an Azure function this week, which was actually going to do cross-tenant integration to retrieve logs from one tenant and stick them into another tenant in effect. And I thought, well, I'll do this with the function app. And I used GitHub Copilot. Now, admittedly, I was using the GPT-5 model because someone told me a little while ago that was the best code model to use. And yes, I can see David shaking his head. And I spoke to Mihal last night, and he was saying, no, don't use that. Use, I think he was saying, use Claude. And there's another model that he referenced, but I can't remember what that one was off the top of my head. And one thing that frustrated me, and again, this is because of the way that the generative AI models work, is I went in one day and I said, all right, just spec out some code for me to do this in an Azure function. Great, got that code, stuck it into Visual Studio, worked a charm. I forgot to save that prompt. And then I went back in the next day and went, oh, okay, hang on a second. I wanted to add something else to it. So I basically added, the prompt you've done, add some extra bits and pieces to do this. Completely different code came back because obviously that's how generative AI systems work, that you're not going to get the same result time after time. So then I had to, luckily, I have done development. Admittedly, it was, 7 or 8 years ago, probably the last time I actually had to crack open Visual Studio in anger. So I could work out what the change, what that impact would be, and to modify the code a little bit. But yeah, that was a fun and games. And then I did this probably about 4 or 5 times. And I reckon about 90% of the time, the code didn't compile the first time round. Yeah. Again, I'll rephrase that. This was GPT-5. I suspect the example I was doing was not something that is a fairly regular piece of code that is stored in GitHub or in other code repositories. But you would think that you would at least get something that compiled without having to worry about, oh, hang on a second, they haven't put this reference in, or they haven't actually assigned this variable correctly, which is one of the things. It's like, seriously, you're initiating the variable, but you haven't done the structure of that correctly. So anyway, complete digression on that one. But weirdly, that one token to rule them all would have worked very nicely for that scenario. I wouldn't have had to worry about doing app registrations and federated linking permissions and all sorts of other weird and wonderful things to try and get that to work, properly. I was disappointed with the MCP interviewer. I just had this vision of an AI person just interviewing things. I know. But, slay the V.
I'll confess I was thinking the same when I saw the title. I was like, but still useful, super useful.
And that's sort of come back to the Spec-Driven development. I think if I'd been able to say, right, this is exactly what I want to achieve, and give it some sort of like spec list or a bill of materials or something, I don't know what it might well be, that would have been a lot better than me sitting here in a prompt going, right, give me a outline of a Azure function that does X, Y, and Z. If there was some sort of codified language that you could use that would then give you something a little bit more consistent, I think that would be a good thing to do. But anyway, enough of my digressions. Unless Cyrus, you want to add to the mess that has now become from my side, it's over to you to talk about Sentinel Graph, which was actually the reason why I was doing all that cross-tenancy log faffing about.
I should have helped you because I saw your message, but I should have helped you with this function. But for what you said, David, we mentioned multiple times in episodes Azure Arc. So probably because now we've done plenty of episodes, it's probably soon the birthday of that channel. we can now add probably, instead of only the description, but even, a pop-up saying like, oh, watch episode 3 or 4 about Azure Arc.
Yeah,
for the
that
for the
involves me
context.
doing work in YouTube.
No, because I can see all the links from the previous episode. But for Copilot, I will not digress. You said it well, Richard. But MCP is actually a discussion I will have now, if also for Sentinel, because we talk about graph. It's always interesting. And for the security breach, for the security incident, like the token to rule them all, please read the article that David mentioned. It's actually scary. I'm still scared, even if it's patched. It's very scary. How easy it was to do. So in my part, there's 3 parts that are going to be linked together. There's a Microsoft Sentinel Graph. This is in public preview. I will talk about Meister, and again about Sentinel, and you talk about UEBA, and I don't know a better way to say it, Richard. So it's going to be this way. We mentioned multiple times Microsoft, but it's not a product, and Microsoft is more like a platform, an ecosystem. And same thing happened to Sentinel. So Sentinel evolved from just a CM to a full platform. And the newest piece is a Sentinel Graph. We can think of it as a relation-aware security context. That's the word I was coming through. Instead of looking at events as the lonely lines in table, Sentinel builds a graph of how users, device, apps, identities, and alerts connect together. The graph helps you follow attack path, and I will not digress on what attack path is. Very interesting. You can Google that. So it follows attack path faster and with fewer clicks. It also powers smarter AI and agents on top of your data. So now I use the keywords data, agents, AI. You can see where I'm going to, and it's not happening in isolation. Microsoft also announced weeks ago Sentinel Data Lake that is now going GA, and the MCP server in public preview. And thanks to David to explain what's a MCP. That's actually what helps Copilot and all the AI work together with more context, and you don't have to create the glue code with all of this context. So now you can have AI agents safely access context, without doing more effort. And the headline for us is the SOC is simple, more context, less swivel chair, and a path to agent-assisted investigation. That's what I wanted to take from all the documentation from Microsoft. So why we should care is the graph lets you pivot from normal analysis to relationship context, user, device, app, and you have alerts. You see the story, not just rows in the table. And as I mentioned before, it sets you up for security Copilot agents that reasons over that context. So, for example, find related risky sign-ins from this host. So now it becomes a faster agent task, not a 20 steps hunt. Before going to talk about Sentinel again, Meister, it's probably one of the first episodes we discussed. It's a tool that I actually love. And if you don't follow him already, Meryl Fernando is working as a product owner, I think. I apologize if you watch the channel for Entra ID. And he managed to have plenty of passionate people, probably I'll join too, working with him. So there's a lot of MVP, a lot of developers from all over the place working with him to improve that tool. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, Meister is a community-driven, as I said, Microsoft security test automation framework. It ships with ready-made checks for your tenant security posture. However, I don't know if we'll find the token to rule them all issue, but it can spot main issues. Security drift and all the misconfiguration. And the new version now runs as an Azure web app with Entra ID protection. So it's all SSO'd and an easy deployment flow. And I will tell later why it's with the UEBA, why it's not, it's a good news. So that means you can now host Meister centrally, secure it, and let approved admins run posture test from a browser. It's clean and simple. And there was a second sub news within that one. The other nice boost is Meister can run KQL. So KQL queries in Microsoft Defender XDR via advanced hunting. And there is a command, it's in my notes, it's invoke empty graph security query. And that sends your KQL to Defender XDR API and pulls results back for check or reports. If you already hunt in KQL, which you do normally, you'll feel at home. And now you can wire those checks into automation. So why all of that matters? 2 points. As I said, you can turn good hunts you already have into repeatable tests. So you can supercharge Meister. For example, query privilege role change, or is the one they use in the documentation, or suspicious device logon, or odd or off grants, as we talk about those legacy connections, then surface gaps into a report. And the second thing, I saw you reacted, Devin, that that was the main weakness of Meister. So now running Meister on Azure Web App with Entra sign-in means controlled access. There's no more random scripts, which I did, that run on random laptops. So it's one secure place to run your posture checks. Digression here, I talked about the Defender XDR. I don't know if you saw, but there is a design changed. There is a new logo branding for Defender, and I personally find it very ugly. Sorry. I mean, they looked AI generated. Sorry, I have to be honest here. They changed the Intune logo, which I'm used to it now. It's okay. It's more round. Because we have all these logos that already Intune. Sorry, it's a digression. But when I learned Intune in 2018, the logo already felt old. You know, this old Windows 98 style with a big square computer with big arrows. But you understand what it means. Like you see that logo, you understand that, okay, it's a device. Okay, so you have like a policies injected, so you can relate. But the new logo, it's all round. So they all look the same for me, if I can make that honest comment. But Defender, it took me 5 minutes to understand that, oh, that's a shield that is a bit melting, probably. I don't know. So probably have a look. Hopefully they will change that soon. Sorry for the digression. And the last news, but is a bit related to the two previous ones. Sentinel UEBA, there was a short news that I've seen, and it's actually interesting because it's 6 new high-value data sources, and I didn't know those ones were not ingested already. So UEBA, it's, from my understanding, was user event behavior analysis. So user event, so and whatever I talk about that is to check. You have a baseline of the way user interact, and you can flag anomalies from users. And actually, it's not only for users. From what I discovered, it's also for devices, obviously identities, and apps, because now they have their own identities. So Microsoft just expanded it with, as I said, 6 important data sources. 3 are Microsoft signals, and 3 are from third-party signals. And the goal is better identity-centered detection across hybrid and multi-cloud. I'm just going to read what they are and try to comment. It's really fast. So Microsoft Defender XDR device logon events. I didn't know this one was not ingested, but that's new. So it spots unusual device access and lateral movement, and that's also feeding attack paths, but I will not digress. It's a big subject, attack paths. Entra ID manage identity signing logs. So that's what I was expecting. That was awaited. So you find quite abuse of non-human identities used by scripts or services. And I'm thinking of a Meister script on devices with those 2 ones. If you had UEBA, you could spot that it was spotted. If you have a non-approved admin that do a scanning for bad reason, you can spot them. And you should not use that anymore. Now you have Meister on the web app with SSO, etc. Entra ID services, Entra ID service principal sign-in logs. It detects weird app service behavior and privilege misuse. So that's actually probably the most important one, because we have to use service principal. And the free author one of third parties, AWS CloudTrail is the equivalent of Entra ID logs, logging events, and you can see risky AWS signings and root activities. GCP audit logs, for example, a failed IAM access, it surfaced denied access attempts that hint a role phishing. And I was surprised about this one because I keep hearing about that author provider, Okta MFA auth policy change. So those news connected together, Microsoft identity piece is becoming more and more relevant as a central source of truth. That one excited me for that reason. Yeah, that's my news. There's plenty of things to say about Meister, but
perhaps we can do a proper session on Meister, Cyrus, for you to go through the sort of ins and outs of the full stack, for want of a better description. By the way, I think it's not just Defender icon that's been redesigned. I think it's the whole of the M365 suite, at least, that's been redesigned. So there's new icons for SharePoint, Word, and Excel, and Teams, and all that sort of stuff. I think, don't quote me on that, but I did see, I think it was on the register or some other one where they were whinging about it a little bit, because they are a little different. And yeah, the Sentinel Graph stuff is really interesting. But keep an eye on it. I think there's a lot of organizations, not just IBM, that are going to be talking about that over the next couple of months, leading up to Ignite at least, and we'll see where that goes after that. So, which just leaves me to round off with a quick diatribe, whatever, around certifications. Now, as I said right at the kickoff of this, one of the reasons why is because as part of my role at IBM, I have to agree with Microsoft how many certifications we're going to drive across the organization in their fiscal. So that's June, July, for people that don't know. So obviously I've been bombarded with information about certifications and other accreditations that Microsoft track our partnership against. So I thought I would just give a sort of a rehash or a rundown of some of those, because I think most of us, well, I'm hoping, and possibly not, but I think most of us probably understand the sort of core certification piece, but it's probably worth just restating that as well. But there are a couple of accreditations. I do use the word accreditation as opposed to certification, even though you do get badges and some sort of level of acknowledgement from Microsoft that you can use in your CV and other areas. But I am drawing a distinction between the certification and those. So start off with the certifications. And again, I'm hoping most of our listeners will understand what these are anyway. But Microsoft offer a whole range of different certs that you can go down. I'll put a link to the latest cert poster, which now has, for those of you who don't know, it now has the GitHub certifications listed on there as well. But if we just stick with the Azure ones for the time being, Microsoft have decided to do these in sort of 3 buckets, for want of a better description. So you've got the fundamentals, which is your entry-level certifications, moving across to Azure role-based certifications, or sometimes the acronym is ARB. So if you see that acronym around, that's Azure role-based certifications. And then you have specialty certs. So I've actually just started to sit down to do the specialty cert SC401, which is the purview and data protection one, replacing the old SC400. So again, that's one thing you have to be aware of, is Microsoft will replace certifications, and sometimes they'll just increment the number like they did for that one. That was SC400 to SC401. But sometimes they just kill it and then they'll just randomly put another one. So 900 level certifications, you see this. Microsoft tend to do a 2-letter intro, then a number. So AZ Azure, MS is M365, basically, modern work certifications, SC for security, and then a number which indicates the certification level. It's not really quite right, because you would think that perhaps if you've got 900 as being the entry level, then perhaps 100 would be the sort of expert deep dive ones. It doesn't quite work like that. But if you see 900 in a cert, that's usually that is a foundational one. Now, those are, as the name suggests, the sort of entry level technical certifications on Microsoft. So Azure 900 is the sort of foundational element that you should need or to go up through the certifications. I think there is a misnomer that should be applied to non-techie roles. So I don't think that salespeople, for example, should necessarily be asked to do an AZ 900 certification or an SC 900 or an AI 900 or whatever it is. By all means, take them if you want to, but certainly there are some organizations that I've worked for that have said, hey, we want non-techies to take these as a foundational piece. I'll get on to a reason why a little bit later on, but also, you know, an AZ 900 is asking you about PowerShell commands. At least when I took it, it did. I wouldn't expect a non-techie to understand, you know, how to write PowerShell. You then go to the role-based certifications. Now, these are targeted at a specific role that Microsoft perceive that a person would perform for an organization or a partner. So Azure Administrator, so the AZ 104. No, it is the 104 certification. 204 is the developer one, if off the top of my head, I think. I always get those two muddled up. And then you've got, say, the AZ 305, which is the Solution Architect certification. Now, some of these have prereqs. So the ones I listed has a prereq. So Azure Expert Architect has a prereq of 104. Don't know why, because I'm not sure that administrating Azure necessarily leads to being able to architect for Azure. But anyway, that's how Microsoft have done it. So you have sometimes you have a prereq that you need to take before you go on to the expert level certifications. And then you get the speciality level. As I said, I've started to study for the 401, which is the purview, but there is also, if I remember correctly off the top of my head, the SAP one, AVS, and I think there's another one floating around. I'll have to check the cert calendar diagram to validate. But those certifications are sort of more of a deep dive into one specific technology or product area within the Microsoft stack, i.e. SAP has been a good example, and AVS. Not sure about Purview so much, but I think personally that's a really important one with all the AI stuff going on at the moment. So perhaps that's why they've separated that out as a speciality. So that's the certifications. As David will probably just nag me to not forget to remind you, most of them need a renewal. So I think it's every year you have to go and sit through a sort of online based renewal process. That's not the same, you know, in my experience, it's not to the same level as the original cert, but it's just there to make sure you haven't, you know, forgotten everything you did in the original certification. The exception to that rule is the fundamentals certifications. They do not require a renewal. Okay, and I don't think the GitHub ones do either. So anybody on a GitHub certification, I don't think they have renewals. David's looking like, I'm not sure, but
I did one a while ago. I'm trying to remember how long ago. Yeah. I've not seen any nudges. Though.
Yeah. One thing to note on the certifications, if you're working for a partner or possibly for a large enterprise with the right agreements, you may get some sort of discount off the certification that you do anyway. Weird thing that I learned the other day. So if you are working for a partner or an organization that has the sort of exam vouchers that you can leverage, the GitHub certifications are actually cheaper. So unless you want to give Pearson VUE extra money, do use the GitHub vouchers instead of the Microsoft vouchers when you register those certifications. Otherwise, you basically give Pearson VUE $50 every time you book an exam. So anyway, that's something that I found out a couple of weeks ago. So that's the certs. Now, that's one way. Now, I'm probably going to say something a little bit controversial here. I'm not a great believer in certifications in terms of measuring how good someone is at using a particular piece of technology. They show how good you are at sitting an exam and getting the knowledge that you need to pass that exam. And certainly in the past, I've worked with people that have had 20, 30 different certifications on the back across AWS, Microsoft, Google, Oracle, you name it. They basically do their whole career by taking certs. So I'm not necessarily a great believer in that. And I think that's one of the reasons why Microsoft really did this applied skills. I'm going to call this an accreditation. Someone might shout at me and say, no, it is a certification, but I'm just going to refer to that as an accreditation. So applied skills are a slightly different way of measuring someone's capability. So these are more based around people who actually do hands-on work on these products day in, day out. And they are delivered typically via sort of hands-on labs in live environments and not via an exam-based one. So they're much more showing that you can go and, I don't know, deploy a VM using PowerShell or an ARM template in, X tenancy, et cetera, et cetera. So those are actually quite good ways of demonstrating your capability. I'm talking obviously from your side, to do a particular role. Now, they're not as widely looked at, I think, is a good way to put it, as the sort of core certifications, which I think is a little bit of a shame. But that is a very valid option for people who want to demonstrate that they have the capabilities to do a specific role within the Microsoft Cloud ecosystem. Right, now we get on to what I'm going to refer to as partner accreditations, but they're not, they're still individual. So you as an individual still have this badge or this sort of level within Microsoft, but they're sort of more related to what you're doing within the organization that you may be working for. So these are broken down into 3 buckets. So sales ready, and this is where I was saying that I'm not sure that the AZ900, for example, is a good way to sort of get salespeople or non-technical people to understand the Microsoft stack. So there's a sales ready one, which looks at sort of a broad product knowledge, but also how you position that product within a conversation with a client or within your own organization potentially. So that is much more focused around sales-based training, and you get 3. In fact, all of these you get 3 different grades. Ended up with something called Titan, if I remember, for all of these. But anyway, which is the highest level. So they will look at doing training, but they'll also look at doing things like, and again, this is why it's more partner associated, is having you on a partner center record, for example, on a deal that is going through the processes. So they're a nice combination of training, but also proactive capability within, having a sale going through the cycle within Microsoft systems. You've then got another 2, which is part of the same sort of bracket, tech deal ready, which again is another technical validation to say that actually you have got a suite of architects or consultants, whatever you want to call them, developers, who are able to do what they say they can do in effect. And again, that requires a sort of a technical assessment, sometimes actually sort of having customer facing demos that are being sort of observed, etc. And again, we'll probably linked to some sort of co-sell opportunity with Microsoft. And the final one is project ready, which again is another sort of technical alignment, but slightly more related to hands-on experience with a particular customer reference or case study to it. So bottom line, and to cut that sort of nicely to a sort of tail, you've got sort of 3 levels of accreditation. Certifications, and I think we all understand those. Study, some sort of, multi-choice, perhaps with a lab sort of exam at the end of it. You have got the applied skillings, which is more showing that you can do something as opposed to just answering a question. And then you've got the partner ready ones, so the sales ready, tech deal ready, and product ready, which are much more sort of partner related accreditations, even though they do give you a nice badge that you can put on your LinkedIn profile or whatever we're using as a Credly these days. But they're much more around that actually sort of partner eminence within Microsoft in a sense. And they're more around actually your ability to deliver, regardless of whether that's from a sales perspective or whether that's from a delivery sort of project ready piece. So anyway, I hope that somebody found that relevant in the course of this, but that has been sort of top of mind for the last couple of weeks on a personal note.
Super interesting. I was looking at those just yesterday, which are the sales writing stuff. There's a lot of good content in the partners.
There is, and I should be remiss, I'm probably remiss in actually pointing this out. There is a new platform that people can use to go to this. I'll put the link in the chat window, in the show notes for this and below, but I think it's skillinhub.com. One thing that tripped me up about this is I looked at it. When you get the login box coming up, it looks like an organizational like SSO login box, but it isn't. So don't assume that it is. It is actually just a brand new account that you create for that site. So yeah, that tripped me up. So I was like, hang on a second. Why is it asking me for this? Putting in the details doesn't work. But yes, so it looks like an organizational sign-in, but it isn't. Okay. So with that one out of the way, I'm looking around and I think that we might well be done. So for people that are still with us now, thank you very much for listening to us or watching us, depending on your platform. Please do like, subscribe, follow, rate, whatever it is that is applicable for the platform that you are consuming this episode on. And we will see you again in 2 weeks. So from me, it's goodbye.